I just want to take a minute and thank everybody for all the support, for listening, financially contributing to me in 2024. 2025 is going to be a great year. But I also want to take 1 second and let people know that I am self supported. If interested in financially contributing to what I'm doing, I have a Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, monthly subscriptions through Local, Patreon. I also have Zelle, and I have a P.O. Box. All of the information is in every single episode of my show notes, and can't wait for 2020, more of 2025, and more conversations ahead. Thank you. Martin, it hasn't been that long, but it feels like the Trump administration's been in there for 6 months, and it's only been starting week 3. It's unbelievable. We really do live in a remarkable time right now, don't you think?
Well, this is what I said. Why Trump picked his cabinet before he even got in is that the last time um, he was a novice. He got there and oh, you don't know how Washington really works. You have to give confidence to the world. And so they picked his cabinet. They stuck in like John Bolton and everybody that stabbed him in the back. So this time he now knows what Washington, it's so ironically, I think it was actually good for him to step away for 4 years and then come back. Um, and look, he's interested in a legacy. All right. So he can't be bought. Uh, and the corruption is just so pervasive. Um, I mean, this U.S. aid thing, it's just the tip of the iceberg. They've been funding Soros, Rockefeller Foundation, money's clearly going to start revolutions. I mean, and then they simply, act as if they're their own independent global government, refuse to answer questions. I mean, you can't make up this stuff.
And for people that don't know, the USAID stands for United States Agency for International Development. So here's my question in regards to that, because I'm kind of conflicted on this, because Elon has been given access to be able to go in there and find out all this corruption and garbage that's been going on. So I'm conflicted in the sense of he was not elected. He was not, he's not he was not, he's got no oath to the Constitution, and he's been given access to all this. But the other side of it, there's so much rot that we're seeing now. It's visible in front of the general public. I mean, what he could do and his team is far better, I think, than what we currently have.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've written about it, and that the deep state is so pervasive. You write a letter to your congressman or whatever, the staff there are always there. All right. If that congressman leaves and next one comes in, they basically, they just rotate. So your letter's not going to get anywhere unless that person who reads it first agrees with it and will pass it on. So the deep state is, like I said, it's not a swamp; it's an ocean. you know, I mean, I've dealt with it for so long. That's largely what has gotten me very frustrated over the years. Um, I mean, even this stuff about Trump's guy come out, oh, lowering the dollar. You don't know how many times I have been called in by governments because of that same stupid statement. They just don't understand. You lower the value of the dollar, oh, so we can sell more widgets. Sounds nice, okay, but you're then devaluing everything else in the country. The 87 crash was because they sold a third of the national debt to Japan. Then you say, okay, I'm going to devalue the dollar by 40%. I said, they're going to sell. Well, why? Because they're going to lose, you idiot. I mean, it's just, I can't tell you how many times I've been called in by governments around the world for the very same stupid statement constantly. Um, I wrote to you know, just because somebody comes from Goldman Sachs doesn't mean they understand international finance. Robert Rubin was in there starting the same stuff. I wrote to him. I said, look, I'm the one that was called in on the 87 crash. If you do this, you're going to cause a crash again. Oh, okay, whatever. And what happened? There was the 97 Asian currency crisis and weeks after. I mean, they don't understand international finance or the world economy. We are all connected. You can't lower the value of the dollar to make your widgets, cheaper to somebody else without cheapening everything else in the country.
So, Martin, what are your thoughts on what Elon is doing right now? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing in terms of U.S. aid? Uncovering this, he's getting access to information.
Look, I think the fact that he's independent is is absolutely critical, because if you have somebody who is part of the government go in and do it, it's kind of like what they talk about with cops with the blue code. One doesn't rat out on another. It's maybe not the most ideal situation, but it's probably the only way to do it. You need somebody that's not part of the government to come in and do this. Um, I mean, look, you've had Rumsfeld. The Hill even put out that the Pentagon has failed its seventh audit in a row. Trillions of dollars are missing. You know, and it's just like, oh, okay, fine. They gloss it over and start all over again. Where's that money going? And at least the Office of Inspector General points it out, but nobody goes in to correct anything. If you running a business and the IRS comes in and says, "Oh, where's that $100,000?" Oh, gee, I don't know what happened to it. You think they're going to leave you alone? I mean, Al are going to come to handcuffs and you're going to, oh, that's tax evasion and away you go. Why don't we do this for these people in government? You're in charge of signing the checks. You're going to jail. There's $2.3 trillion missing in a single year's budget. You're going to jail. Okay. And then maybe you'll say, look, I was told to do it by this guy. That's the only way you're going to get to this stuff.
But do you think that it can be gotten to at this point? And I mean, because I had said even before Trump took office, there's no way that they're going to allow these things to be turned upside down. And I mean, I thought these institutions they're not salvageable because they're so rotted to the core.
My concern would be that they would try and assassinate, Trump and his team, actually, anything they possibly can do. But Trump has at least done something interesting. He's offered buyouts to people to give up their jobs, and over 20,000 people have taken it so far. So at least makes it more voluntary. I think I said before, I got called into a company in Germany. I was in London. They said, we need you here at the board meeting first thing in the morning. I said, what's the problem? You'll see when you get there. And I get there and they appoint me advisor over the pension fund. No proposal, no cost, and nothing. And then they resign. I said, what is going on here? And the government, they wanted to lay off 20% of the workforce. The government approved, and at the last minute, they said you have to make the offer to everybody. So what happened? Everybody that knew they could get a job across the street, they took the offer and left. And the company's going to be stuck with the drudge of the earth that basically they wanted to get rid of to begin with. That's my concern with this situation. The people that are taking the money and running, they're probably the more qualified people. And they're doing it because, hey, I know I can get a job elsewhere. The ones that we're going to get stuck with, that's the downside that I see what Trump is doing with this buyout. Only because I met with a member of the IMF board, and I relayed that situation that I encountered in Germany, and they said, yes, we know the same thing happened in Greece. Human nature is human nature. You offer them $100,000 and gee, I can get a job right across the street right away. You take it and you run. If you don't think you can get a job, you don't take it and you stay. So I would say that's my criticism of the buyout thing. I think, that's the woke agenda. Oh, we have to be fair and equal, and that's not the case. You fire the guy that doesn't work. That's the way it should be. And Trump is trying to cut the baby in half, and I don't think it's going to work that way. But so what are we going to have afterwards? It's hard to say, but probably more incompetent people in government than we had before. Look, this Doge thing, a lot of people are upset about. That's why a lot of people just simply picked up and left. But look, we got to start someplace. I mean, it's the only other solution is a complete revolution. The government completely is decimated, and you start all over from scratch. That's your only other solution.
Do you think these institutions could be salvageable now that he's had a few weeks to? I mean, you're seeing stuff is coming out. I mean, what are your thoughts on all that?
Look, with this agency that Elon went into, look, there have been rumors for a long time that they've been funding Soros on the side. There were documents dating back where between Soros and this agency that he was selected to help as a charity to distribute money and nonsense, dating 1993. All right, and this is not something new. He was behind sending, funding money coming from U.S. aid to fund the 2014 revolution in Ukraine. He was out there trying to stop Brexit. Look, you're going to, oh, he's this billionaire. Is it really all his money? Is this why Biden gave him the Medal of Honor? Because you're the show for us to buy everything else on the side. I don't know. But until we start getting some of this information out, I think the plus side of it, of Elon doing this, going into that agency, because I can tell you everybody I've ever spoken to in Washington all like shake their head at that agency. They do see themselves as separate from the government almost, and refuse to answer questions, and they're really globalists. Why are we funding that which is against our own government? They call it, oh, we're funding democracy. Yes, okay, fine. This democracy stuff that they funnel money to Bill Crystal. I know Bill. All right. Goes through Rockefeller Foundation, and from Rockefeller Foundation to Crystal, who's then anti-Trump. He just posted on his site on X, to basically oppose Trump for everything because he wants war. This is what the neocons do. It's just USAID is a horrible agency. It should be completely gutted and shut down.
But then it gets absorbed within the State Department, and Marco Rubio is overseeing it right now. And, I saw that, and I was like, okay, are they going to do away with it, or they're just going to hide it into the State Department?
No, I think basically, as some of the stuff that I've heard about for years that's involved in this agency, as that starts to come out and make the headlines, I think they're going to have a very difficult time in even trying to keep it open. And any Democrat that's out there, oh, this is outrageous, blah, 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 whatever, should be hauled off and charged for conspiracy against the government. I mean, it's just ridiculous. When you have Soros involved in this, the Rockefeller Foundation, which is, in link with Bill Gates' father. You can read, Justice Ginsburg, the whole Roe versus Wade thing had nothing to do with women's rights. Even she said when she got to the Supreme Court, this was all about eugenics, reducing the population. And the Planned Parenthood was being stuck in minority areas. I mean, there are devious people out here. I hate to tell you, but they really are.
Was Ginsburg was she created through USAID? I don't, what's her attachment to it?
No, Justice Ginsburg I'm talking about.
Justice Ginsburg. You're talking about the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
Justice Ginsburg.
The Supreme Court Justice, yeah.
What was her affiliation with USAID?
No, she wasn't affiliated with that. She was, when she got to the Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade was there. And she said it had nothing to do with women's rights. It was really about eugenics, reducing the population. And that was all, Gates and Rockefeller Foundation. That gets funded by U.S., aid.
Yeah, people that, I don't want to say like less plugged in or dialed in than, like yourself or me that watches this stuff all day. I mean, they really still believe when you start talking about women's rights and what have you, that the government cares. There's an agenda behind everything. But this is how clueless people are, Martin. They don't get it.
No, I know. Look, it's a very good psychological ploy. You support transgender guys in women's sports, and then at the same time claim you're fighting for women's rights when they set all the records. I mean, it's very inconsistent. They say whatever they need to say to that group. That's about it. I mean, look, I've dealt with Washington for a long time, and they don't, I'll just say it very rudely and bluntly, they don't give a shit about you, period. And it's all about them and the power. And like I said, when I was there and Reagan was elected, the Republicans were all upset. I said, what's the problem? Oh, you don't understand. I said, what don't I understand? Oh, he's a governor. He's not from Washington. We're going to have to train him. This is the attitude. This is why they don't like RFK. They don't like Trump. They don't want anybody from outside of Washington in any of those positions. They could care less, if it's Republican or Democrat. They just, because none of them are going to, either side will not take away the feeding trough.
What do you think the future of the Democratic Party is?
Our computer says basically it will split, and this is the end of it. Look, you just have a lot of people there. You have conservative Democrats that get it, and they're not onto this whole woke agenda. And then you got others that are refusing to admit. Um, I mean, I've actually seen, I couldn't believe it, that Camilla lost because of basically, anti-female. I mean, it's like it's got nothing to do with what she stood for or said or anything else. I mean, it's she was a woman, that's why she lost. This is the nonsense that you hear. Um, Look, they went after Trump with all the legal ramifications they could because they look at it from their perspective. Oh, make him a felon, then nobody will vote for him. And they did. Why? They're confused. It's because there are no mirrors in Washington. They don't look at themselves. I mean, I've been caught into so many of these different crises, and I can tell you, it's always who caused it. Let's go find them. They never consider. When I was called into the Brady Commission for the '87 crash, you can read the report. I didn't even want to go in. All right. It was a friend of mine, Jack Schwager, called and said, if you don't go in, they're going to take our computers away because they were saying it was computer trading. At the end of the report, I went in and I said, look, you lowered the value of the dollar by 40%. All the selling came out of foreign exchange. All right. So I at least got them to leave our computers alone. You can read the end of the report. It says, we think foreign exchange had something to do with it. That was it. Okay. They're not going to blame G5. They're just not going to, it's not going to happen. They're never, ever going to blame themselves. It's always us.
The what else is the computer showing you right now in regards to? I mean, we've talked before how the 24 election potentially was the last one. Anything showing in regards to that or economic forecasts?
Look, where I disagree with Trump is on the tariff issue. I understand he thinks, make America great, blah, blah, blah. He did a post saying that anybody that disagrees with the tariffs, that they're like anti-American or some nonsense or whatever. But and saying that the country was funded with tariffs before the income tax. That's true. But it was also before socialism. All right. So now you have Social Security. You got all this other kind of stuff in here. And most people pay more in Social Security than they do in income tax. So I'm sorry. Tariffs are not going to cut it that way. But the danger is that, look, what he did with Canada and Mexico, 25%, that's outrageous. It is so outrageous. However, that's his art of the deal. He did that to Colombia and they folded. Okay. So he did that to Mexico and he did it to Canada.
They fold. Did you think,
really,
Martin, let me interrupt you. Did you think they were going to fold like they did?
Oh, of course. They have to. 25% tariff would look, Canada's in trouble to begin with, anyhow. Canada is so socialistic. Most people don't realize they have trade barriers between their own states, their own provinces. Tariffs and everything internally. So Ontario doesn't want anything coming from Quebec. So they put it, it's the same shit. What I was to say. I mean, we don't have that in the U.S. New Jersey doesn't put, a tariff on somebody selling something from Pennsylvania. I mean, it's just nonsense. But that's Canada. Most people don't realize it. But, my concern is Europe, we are heading into an economic decline into 2028. And Trump will probably end up being blamed for it. He may go down in history as Herbert Hoover, but Europe is a basket case. All right. As you know, they came to me when they were forming the euro, and everything they were saying about it was nothing but complete nonsense. To sell it, we'll all pay the same interest rate. I said, you're not going to do that. All right, you're comparing it to the dollar federally. All right, but unless you create a national debt, consolidate all the debts, not going to happen. And it was Helmut Kohl. And before he died, he even said he acted like a dictator. And he said if he allowed the German people to vote on joining the euro, he would have lost 7-3. So the euro would have never taken place. So he took Germany into the euro as a dictator. Nobody was allowed to vote. That was it. I'm just going in. The heck with you, an executive order. That was it. And his criteria was that the Germans would be upset thinking that consolidation of the debts they're paying off Greece or Italy, etc. So his criteria was no consolidation of the debt. That's where this came from. I warned them. I said, this is going to fail. All right. What will happen is the same thing in the U.S. We have a single currency, very nice, but every state has its own debt and every state has a different credit rating. I said, that's what's going to happen in Europe. And you're just going to move the volatility from the currency you want to solve to the bond market, which is what's happened. You're bullish Germany, you're bearish Italy, you buy the bonds and you sell the Italian. I mean, it didn't accomplish anything. So now the problem is the debts have been running crazy. The central bank lowered interest rates to negative in 2014. I warned them, don't do this. You're absolutely crazy. So now you have European debt at negative yields as reserves for banks and pension funds. Negative. All right. And then they have to start raising interest rates because of inflation. Those bonds that they sold are like maybe worth 50, 60 cents on the dollar. I mean, European banks are not like American. They don't have to mark to market. They mark to basically cost. And the government allows them to do that to basically hide any losses. So the problem we have is that I'm more concerned about what Trump will do on the tariff issue with Europe, because Europe is the main problem. And they're extremely left-wing that way. Like France doesn't want anybody else calling anything champagne because it comes from the Champagne region only in France. U.S. shouldn't, California shouldn't have champagne. Stuff like this. I would expect him to put at least a 10% tariff on the EU. The computer's showing we're going into a recession into 2028. Europe is probably going to be a depression. You're already seeing the stress. I talk to high-level people in Europe all the time. The stress is everybody can see it. People that disagreed with me 2 years ago say, it's just a question of when we break up now. They can see it. You have basically a dictatorial form of government in Europe. Ursula, she doesn't stand for election. All right, she's appointed by the other heads of state. All right, all the people that make the laws there in the commission, none of them stand for election. None of them. So what you're talking about, Elon Musk, that is Europe all over again. All right, there's nobody. The Europeans have no right to vote to change the government, almost like Ukraine. Um, and who has been behind this? This has been, Klaus Schwab and the WEF. Ursula was on his board. Christine Lagarde had the ECB. She was the IMF on his board. Head of every one of them came from his board. This is Schwab's idea. He's indoctrinated all these people into like a cult, really. And look, I've met him. He even has a bust of Lenin on the bookshelf in his office. It's this. Europe is not doing very well at all, and it's a coin toss who's going to fail first on a sovereign debt crisis. Is it going to be Europe or is it going to be Japan? Japan's in the same kind of boat. They've relied for decades on this idea that before the emperor was perceived to be God. All right. So when he had to resign that, whatever, I'd be out to dinner with a head of one of the major top 10 companies. You get a few drinks in them and you go, emperor's still God, I say, yeah, okay. But what they did is that level of respect was transferred to the government. So Minister of Finance can do no wrong. Whatever he says, that's it. There was a company that lost, a few $1 billion. I warned them. I said, the market's going to go down. Oh, you don't understand. I said, what don't I understand? Ministry of Finance says they're not going to allow the market to go down. I said, that's very nice, but I'm telling you it's going down. All right. Ended up losing a couple $1 billion, was even charged in court and everything else, all because he believed in the government. Wasn't that he was a crook or something like that. He really believed that the government was not going to allow the market to go down. So it's a little different aspect in Japan compared to Europe. You have a little bit of that in China as well. Because I was called in by the central bank, and they had, in the 97 Asian currency crisis, it was kind of like walking on water because I was called in by the central bank, So it's just different there compared to here or whatever.
So where is your concern then? Is it more with Japan or more with the EU? And before you answer that, go ahead and answer that. Sorry. Another question after.
No, my concern more is with the EU because you're looking at Japan goes into a sovereign debt crisis. It's one country. Europe, you're talking about the breakup of the EU. And it's just.
What does that mean, Martin, if the EU breaks up? Is that where things go kinetic at that point?
Pretty much. You have a lot of old resentments and things of this nature that resurface. Macron, he's basically what we call the de Gaulle syndrome. Um, when we liberated France, he insisted he had to be at the front of the parade, even though he didn't do anything. All right, so he became, and he became, the head of France. But um, this idea has been in France that the world would be speaking French had they won at Waterloo. And so it's been this dream, I would say that, and this is what Macron's really doing. He's trying to be the leader of Europe, making all kinds of statements to, for everything, even that he will send troops into Ukraine, knowing that it would cause, basically, World War III. But it's more like he's been the one pushing for this unification, and France should take the lead. That's why we call it the old, de Gaulle syndrome, basically. Still trying to show that France is ruled all of Europe. I mean, I guess it's hard to explain, but he has. There's been, a problem with his government. It's began to fail. He's even been out there, beating the war drums constantly, and the interest rates went higher on French debt than that of Greece. Corporate debt, basically was paying lower rates than government, showing that there is a lack of confidence in his administration. And this is what you're beginning to see in Europe. I mean, I spoke to 3 governments on trip there last year, and it's, I just walk out of there shaking my head. One of them said, "Oh, well, Putin's going to have to accept what we demand." I said, "Really? Are you going to invade Russia? But how are you going to do that?"
So President Trump made it pretty clear over the weekend that they will be imposing tariffs on the EU. Now, when that happens, you expect it to be 10%, or would you higher around 25%?
Now, if he does the 25%, that's a negotiating tactic. 10 is more legitimate, like he did on China. What's happening already, I can tell you. I don't know what's out, if it's made the press at all yet, but even though the gold that's usually in the London metals market, it's all being shipped to the United States. It's even to the point where you're looking at a shortage of gold now in Europe that's going to develop. Why? Because you put a tariff on, there probably won't be any exceptions. They'll be looking at if you want to buy gold and they're going to ship it to you from London. If there's a 10% tariff, you're going to have to pay a 10% tariff fee to get it in. So already that's beginning to shift. And you'll see it with other aspects as well. But Europe, economically, Europe is in serious trouble. Germany, its economy has actually shrunk by 3%. You put in, between COVID and then sanctions on Russia, etc. You put a lot of small businesses out of work. That was it. And then you put in this climate change nonsense, and then you had, tens of thousands of workers in Volkswagen and other, protesting. And we're going to have to lay off because we can only produce electric cars from this period, they're beginning to see that the climate change stuff is nonsense, and the costs have been tremendous. Fine, we blew up Nord Stream 1. I think that's pretty much confirmed. It was the United States behind that. Um, but there's Nord Stream 2. And so what's happened is that Germany has simply turned it off. So it's kind of like they have taken a gun, shot themselves in the foot, and say, see, if you don't do what I tell you, this is what I'm going to do to you. um, their economy is shrinking. Their energy they have to get, is all being imported at this stage. Germany was the bulwark of the whole European economy. And without that, I mean, the industrial production, it's just declining. The cost to do things, importing, energy at 2 to 3 times the price of what they could get it from Russia is just astronomical. Now, I hope Trump is reasonable with Russia, and what I mean is that fine, he has at least come out and said that Zelensky should hold elections. I mean, he's a dictator, and Ukrainians I speak to, like I've said before, if he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. They, even Putin has come out, and said, fine, if I negotiate peace with Zelensky, is it legitimate? His term of office expired last May. He won't allow elections because he knows that I think he would lose. There was a coup against him I think it was on May 7th last year, 2 colonels, and the plot was stopped, but then he fired the head of his security division because of it. And from what I'm told, his immediate bodyguard are Americans now because he doesn't even trust Ukrainians. It was the same thing they tried taking out Hitler. Had they taken out Hitler to save their country? And this guy, the negativity of Zelensky from the Ukrainian perspective, and you got to look at it from their eyes. There was a peace deal. It made the front page news there in Ukrainian Pravda. Boris Johnson flew in and said, you're not allowed to have peace. You're looking at over 1 million people, Ukrainians now, have died since then. All right. And the question that I hear from them, can we even have peace in our own country without permission from Washington? It's your country. It's getting blown up, and you have no right to vote, no right to negotiate anything unless somebody in Washington says it's okay. I mean, that's just not right. And that's why they look at Zelensky. Honestly, when this thing is over, I don't think he's going to be able to step aside and remain there. Somebody's going to kill him. He's killed so many people, families, etc. I think unfortunately, I think he's going to move to Miami. But
somebody else said does he have land in Florida or something?
There's a whole area in Miami, yeah, with a lot of people that have come over. I haven't verified it, but supposedly he has purchased a nice estate there.
What do you mean? There's a whole area where people like have to go to disappear, so to speak, and there's a region of Miami they can do it?
Well, you've got a lot of Russians that have fled there. It's a whole area very, Um, it's all from Russia, Ukraine, the
Hmm.
whole section. Kind of like, like New York was, you had the Chinese ghetto, the Italian ghetto, etc. They all end up being in the same area initially. That's what's happened in Miami.
Do you think, focusing on Russia here for a second, I mean Assad, would they ever turn him back over to Syria? Because he's in Russia somewhere.
What for, really? We're the ones that stuck them in there. I mean, we are the ones that carved up the Middle East and stuck these dictators in. Um, they require dictators. Why? Because they don't see themselves as Syrian. They're all tribes. All right. They see themselves as Sunni, Shiite, etc. They don't. They. We created these borders. Um, if you understand the real history of the Middle East, and I've spent time there, um, there was an Arabian War. The Saudi tribe won, so we call it Saudi Arabia. All right, the losers ended up getting Jordan. All right, now Jordan was supposed to be where the Palestinians were. So what happened? Um, You can look this one up. The king of Jordan now, the Hashemites, marries a Palestinian to try and create peace. I mean, this stuff's been, you got religious differences. I mean, they don't see themselves as, all Syrian, etc., or whatever. They still see themselves first as tribal, like Kurds versus this. The Kurds are don't have their own country either. They're part of Iraq, part of Syria.
Well, and you saw yesterday where President Trump was talking how the Palestinians are not going to be able to return to Gaza, and he was saying because Netanyahu is there, 1.7, 1.8 million Palestinians, and the art of the deal from what I read today, because he was saying we'll go in there and clear it out, and those people get relocated. And now they're saying he did that intentionally to incentivize other countries to do it and not the United States. But how are you going to do that? These people, they're not going to just move peacefully. I mean, how is that going to work?
I don't know, because it's tribal. It's very interesting. I mean, I've been there. I've driven through the West Bank, etc. And you look at it, and there are mud huts and things like, and people are fighting over this. But you know, um, you're not talking about $1 million mansions and stuff. It's I don't know. I say the Palestinians originally were supposed to have Jordan, um, but out of that war, the Arabian War, the Hashemites ended up taking it, um, and then the king married a Palestinian to try and create peace. So, I mean, this whole area is just. Are you ever going to get peace out of that area? I don't think so. Um, they just these resentments are there for a long time. You're talking about centuries. I mean, look at the hostility between Greece and Turkey. This goes back to Alexander the Great and Xerxes. You're talking about thousands of years here. It's just not. I don't see it as solvable. You're never going to get Greece and Turkey really to be brothers. They'll shake hands and smile for the camera, but that's about it.
The In regards to coming back to Russia for a second, with Putin and Trump trying to get that resolved to some type of settlement. How close is that from happening? And like you and I have talked about in the past, the neocons, they don't want this to end. So as we sit here today, beginning of February, where do you see this going?
Well, I'm at least encouraged to some, degree. I mean, like I had said before, I spoke directly to RFK and on this subject. What would you suggest to solve the war? Um, look, the Donbass are mostly Russians. All right. Brezhnev was born there. Khrushchev came from that area. Khrushchev was put in charge of rebuilding Kiev. All right. So to say that this is now Ukraine and historically it doesn't really add up to a whole bunch. All right. But the deal was the Minsk agreement was to allow the Donbass to have an election and vote for separation. This is the way, just look at Yugoslavia, how it broke up. It broke up according to ethnic lines. Simple as that. All right. And that was the way for peace. And what has Zelensky done? Oh, no, it's our territory. And then tells them you can't speak Russian anymore. And by the way, your religion, you got to change it. I don't think that would work in Canada if you went and said, Quebec, you can no longer speak French. You're going to have a war in Canada. You can't do this kind of stuff. And so Zelensky's just been doing whatever he's been told to do. Invade Russia. Why would you invade Russia when you're supposed to be defending the Donbass, but you take your troops from there and to invade Russia? And that was basically an instruction. Look, even one of the commanders that went into invaded Russia, he said, we had no idea that's what we were doing. We thought we were just going to the border. Zelensky basically, told them what to do, and now you do this. And that order came from the neocons. They were looking basically to do any, figure if they took the war directly into Russia, Putin would respond, attack something, anything in NATO to allow them to invoke Article 5 and World War III. That's what this was about. You want peace? Just honor the Minsk agreement. Simple as that. The Donbass gets to vote. They get to separate. Just look at Yugoslavia. It broke up. You got Montenegro, Croatia, etc. I mean, they all split up according to ethnic lines. That is the solution. All this war and killing of millions of people is simply orchestrated by the neocons because they want war with Russia, period. That's it. You got Bill Kristol just put on his X post about how everybody should be against Trump and we got to remove him. We should basically file as many lawsuits against him to prevent him from doing anything. All he wants is war.
Do you think we've avoided that at this point with Trump coming back into office?
This was just 2 days ago. Look, I know some of these people. I've even been to dinners with them at the White House. I mean, you're not going to change them. I argued with Kristol back in the 90s. He was back then, and he wrote the book. It's still available, I think, on Amazon. To justify the invasion of Iraq. But back in the 90s, I argued with him. It was like, if we remove Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, we'll bring peace to the Middle East. I said, you're out of your mind. These people are tribal. That's not has anything to do with, and in that case, basically you needed dictators. Saddam Hussein at least, would oppress somebody if you get out of line. All right. And even Tony Blair, you can look on YouTube at his apology. We thought we were freeing people from the tyranny of Saddam. We didn't realize we subjected them to sectarian violence. Saddam kept the tribes in place. You removed him and you went right back to tribal warfare. You had ISIS cutting off people's heads and everything else. Look, if you don't understand the true nature of the Middle East, you shouldn't even be talking about it.
What so you think, last thing on Russia, and then I want to ask you one more question regarding domestically. So do you think this with Russia Ukraine, will Trump be able to get this resolved somewhat quickly, or what is your timeline for this to, or do you think it'll continue or escalate?
The key here is that Zelensky has just come out, I think this morning or last night, and said, all right, fine, he's willing to negotiate. He knows his days are numbered. Trump has come out and said he wants an election in Ukraine. All right. He goes to an election, he's thrown out. Simple as that. My solution is honor the Minsk agreement. End the war. That's it. Russia, removes itself from the Donbass. The Donbass gets to, basically vote for itself. It can be monitored by the UN or whoever you want to monitor it. The Russians, they're going to vote to separate, period. That's it. They're hated by Ukrainians. And I've told you, I've had, two Ukrainian employees, one from Kiev and one from Donetsk, one from each side. They would not even talk to each other. We had a conference in Greece, and the one from Kiev refused to even take the quickest way home, which was a connecting flight through Moscow. No. She went off to Spain or something. Spain, almost double the time, because she wouldn't spend even 35 minutes in Moscow airport between planes. I mean, the hatred is just like, it's systemic. It's not solvable. If you brought a bottle of Russian vodka to dinner in Kiev, you're lucky they don't take it and smash it over your head. This is just it. Look, I've got video of Zelensky on stage as a comic before president. He was hiding the fact that he was Jewish. He married a Christian girl. His children are baptized. All right. And you can look at the video on my site. He's joking about confiscating assets from Russians and Jews. Very anti-Semitic. Then he becomes president. Oh, I'm Jewish. Amazing how that suddenly changed,
So my last question, but two, does it concern you at all, coming back domestically, with all these executive orders in regards to tariffs and, I mean, on and on and on, Iran, the sovereign wealth fund that was just created, and how, I had Paul Craig Roberts on earlier in the week, and he was bringing up the fact that we're now going the route of executive orders and not going through Congress anymore for a lot of this stuff. And if the other side were to get back into power, they do away with all these EOs and then create their own, start doing their own executive orders. Does that concern you?
Well, look, I'm not a big fan of executive orders. The president has a right to do an executive order that is like a CEO of a company. If he wants to fire a bunch of people, he has the right to do that. That's what his job is. All right. You had Biden do an executive order. What was it? The last day in office, outlawing gas stoves. you know, no, that should be something that is decided by Congress, not you. Um, the tariff issue is a quasi area that is within the executive power. So I would look at it more from a standpoint: is it viable from a CEO's perspective? If you're going to go off and start doing all sorts of other things, it's questionable. But look, I've been in the minority on that. When Roosevelt confiscated gold in 1933, it was an executive order. When JFK removed the silver from the coins, it was an executive order. I mean, you can just go down the list. I mean, this is not something that's new. All right. Going after USAD, yes, that's what he's supposed to do. That's in his purview. All right. Things, to deal with the State Department, things of this nature. That's part of being the president and the executive side. When you start going into climate change and things of this nature, no. Those are things that should be going to Congress. But look, as I said at the start, what they did to Trump the first time in, they played him for a fool. They stuffed his cabinet with everybody was stabbing him in the back every which way, and that was to basically to constrain him to protect the deep state. When he left, he ended up understanding this. As I said, I used to be part of the vetting process to pick, they'd send me in to see, if somebody was, who wanted to run for president. So I know, I've been there. I've seen it. They picked the cabinets. All right. That's what they did to Trump the first time in. They did that to Bush. You think that Bush actually, hired Cheney? No. All right. They put Cheney in. When they asked me to go visit, we wanted to send you down to meet with Bush Jr. I said, yeah, okay, fine. But this one's different. What's different? Oh, no, he's really stupid. I said, what? Before then, they would send me in to explain how the world economy works. And it was really a critique that I get back and they'd say, okay, do you think he's smart enough? Can he handle it? That's how it went. Then all of a sudden, Bush Jr. was like, oh, no, he's stupid. I said, what? They picked the whole cabinet. They put Cheney in. It was Cheney that did basically, took us into Iraq, not Bush. I was even offered the position of chief economic advisor in the White House. I said, no, thanks. I'm not interested in giving up my company for a 2-year stint. I know the way this works. So what Trump is doing now is basically a shot across the bow at the whole deep state. All right. It's my people this time, not yours. So I've been more optimistic that he can actually make some changes. Let's see what happens. The executive orders, like I said, I've been more critical of executive orders than probably most. But I look at the Supreme Court decisions on them, and I view it more as what's his purview. Basically, it's got to be something to do with like an executive CEO. What's his view?
Last thing, what are your thoughts on the sovereign wealth fund that was created via executive order this week?
Um, Actually, back in the 90s, I was called in to do that. Um, I went through the whole thing. I said, "This is how we do it. We set it up according to track records." And uh, the Democrats wouldn't vote for it back then. And I said, what's the problem here? I mean, um, it was to create, basically take Social Security and turn it into a sovereign wealth fund, which meant that we would stop buying exclusively just government debt. And had we done so back then, Social Security would be flushed with money. I mean, look at what, if we invested in the top equities and stuff, just on the Dow. I mean, you're looking at, from 5,000 to 40,000. It's, so, I mean, the Democrats, they refused to vote for it because they said that they wanted to change the fund managers if they got in. And I said, look, I don't care if the guy voted at all. I'm not asking what he voted for or who. All right. What's his track record? That's it. Yeah, and say, oh, well, you voted for Democrat, but you only did 5% versus this guy did 30%, but you voted Republican, so I'm going to go with the 5. I mean, that's not the way you run it. But look, most other countries have sovereign wealth funds. We actually advise a few of them. And, you're talking about clients in excess of $1 trillion.
So you think it's a good thing?
Yeah. Particularly, I think it's a necessary first step. We're going to have a debt crisis. All right. The only way out of this debt crisis is a solution I put forward. I think it's even on YouTube. We issue basically a coupon. All right. We swap it for the debt you have. Get a 30-year bond, fine. Okay. This coupon is only good for buying domestic securities. So you would take it to Merrill Lynch or whoever your broker is. You could buy corporate debt or shares. All right. They take the coupon as cash. They send it back to the Treasury. It's redeemed, done. All right. So you're taking $34 trillion, $35 trillion. You're moving it from the debt market into the private equity market. All right. You're talking about creating the biggest economic boom in history. People that wanted to start companies and would have cash available. All right. Mortgages. Your mortgage rates are high because the bank's going to look at it and say, gee, I can get, AAA over here from the Treasury. You want me to give it to you? I want a premium. All right. So the government's competing for money against us in every sector. Eliminate that. All right. Social Security should have been a sovereign wealth fund. All right. Then the money's actually invested. All right. And if it's invested, we would have made a ton of money. I have one girl who works in our company. Her mother worked for Social Security. Even her mother told her, "Don't count on it. It's not going to be here when you when you get your age." Um, Look, I don't know his details on the sovereign wealth fund, but I know what I had initially was called in to do back in the 90s. Um, you're buying, really just private side. Look, even when they created the Federal Reserve, it was initially set up absolutely brilliantly. Um, to stimulate and to be the lender of last resort had nothing to do with government debt. They bought private corporate paper. So a corporation, all right, in hard times would issue a 90-day paper. The Fed would buy it, mainly because lender of last resort, because the banks were reluctant to lend money. All right. Then World War I came. That was created in 1913, along with income tax. Um, then World War I comes. Our politicians told the Fed, look, stop buying the private stuff. You got to buy our debt. They never put it back. So today, the Fed is lost all its power. It doesn't stimulate the economy like it was intended to. It's got to be indirectly. So quantitative easing, what was that? Well, we'll buy some 30-year bonds, take them, reduce the supply in the open market, and maybe the banks will then lend to the people. It's all indirect. But, like I said, the original design of the Fed was this idea of a public versus private. If we kept it that way, it was fine. All right. That's why you get these people, all the, the bankers own the Fed. Yeah, they were supposed to. Why? All right. You're only going to lend corporately. And you were supposed to be a bailout for banks that got in trouble. So the bankers had to pay into it. So the taxpayer didn't get involved in bailouts. That's what it was all about. But it's been distorted and twisted every which way from Sunday ever since. Roosevelt took it all to get his New Deal through and usurped all the power into Washington. We have 13 branches. Why? Because there were capital flow problems domestically. 1906, the San Francisco earthquake. The insurance companies on the West, were on the East Coast. Money went to the West Coast. So banks, there were shortages of cash. Banks were failing in New York. All right. So then that's why each branch had an independent interest rate. Pick up the newspapers, Google them from the 20s. You'll see listed all the branches. This one's paying 4, this one's paying 3. If there was a shortage of cash in your area, okay, fine, I'll raise it to 4% to attract money to my area. That's what it was about. Roosevelt usurped that because he wanted his New Deal. So he took all the power away from the Federal Reserve. People blame the Fed all the time. It's kind of like blaming the gun for killing somebody rather than the guy that pulled the trigger.
Martin, where can people find you?
ArmstrongEconomics.com. You don't have to put in your email or anything. It's an open source for basically for the world.
Sounds to me like I don't want to be assumptive here, but you're optimistic of where we're at in the short term.
Yes, domestically, um, domestically, we're at best we get a recession. Europe, depression. So it's not going to be the same everywhere. All right. Americans have woken up that actually that saying, go woke, go broke, which is true. Democrats are fighting that, blaming, well, Biden should have got out earlier or Pelosi or this. No, it's your ideas. All right. People don't want to, have 23 genders of and all this other kind of nonsense that you went down. I had a friend of mine who was basically a Democrat, standing in line, taking to vote, took a picture, and on there was basically a restroom and had, a gender sign, different genders. It said, you know which way I'm voting this time. I mean, that's what they just did not understand. And a lot of them don't get it. They just don't get it. Um, Justin Trudeau had to resign. He put in climate change tax on every house. What is this going to do? You can really change the climate? I guess there were ice ages because we weren't taxed before, right? It just gets to be ridiculous. You're seeing the same thing going on. AfD rising in Germany. If they're running neck and neck. If they win, they are basically following the same kind of path as Trump. They'll be against the EU. That can break the EU more than anything. But you're seeing, Hungary, all over. Zelensky cut off the gas to his neighbors to punish Russia. Okay, fine, but you're punishing them too. It's I don't know. We just got a crop of the world's worst leaders, I think, in human history. But they just seem to enjoy the power, but have no concept of how the world even functions. But so yes, I'm more optimistic domestically. I think that you're going to see more political stress in Europe. The German elections, I think, are going to be critical to watch. But look, you've had EU officials actually come out and said, well, Romania voted against us and we reversed that election, and have actually come out and said we can do the same in Germany. You do that, you're getting civil unrest. People voted for this. How would you like it? Say, okay, fine, everybody voted for Trump, and Biden says, I don't care, doesn't matter, he can't come in. That's basically what you're seeing in Europe. So I'm not very optimistic there.
Martin, as always, thanks for coming back on. I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, probably after the German elections.
Mic drop.